Let's get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar on ADA transition plans. Today's presenter is Carla Gray. Carla has her national certification and state licensure in therapeutic recreation and her national certification as an ADA coordinator. She received her undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. Over her 37-year career, she has focused on creating inclusive and welcoming communities and equity of access for members of the disability community. She is the founder and owner of Accessibility Essentials and is currently an ADA compliance coordinator for a park and recreation department in the state. I'll turn it over to Carla.
Hello. Hopefully everybody is enjoying this warmer weather and not as chilly as it was a minute ago. Before we get started, again, welcome and glad that you were able to join us today. I know that this is a topic that can be kind of overwhelming, and hopefully today, as we go through it, you'll become more comfortable with it. As Terry was saying, I have at this point in time, it's about 38 years of experience. And if you know anything about the ADA, you know that we just celebrated the 35th anniversary of the ADA. So I have been in my field longer than the ADA has been a law. Whoa, something just changed on mine. I'm sorry. There we go. My screen went away for a second. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But again, we're going to be talking about ADA, developing transition plans. And we'll go ahead to the next slide. So one thing I want to make sure everybody understands, we're going to do a quick disclaimer. The information provided in this educational session on ADA and compliance is intended for general informational purposes only. The presenter has extensive expertise with 38 years of experience in RT, TR, and ADA compliance. It's important to note that the content presented does not constitute legal advice. Attendees should understand that the presenter offers educational insights and best practices based on their professional experience. Specific questions about legal matters within individual organizations should be directed to your legal professionals within those organizations. By participating in this session, you're acknowledging that the information provided is not a substitute for legal advice specific to circumstances. Attendees are encouraged to consult legal counsel within their organizations for guidance on specific, unique ADA compliance needs. So, on to our next. So first off, I want to acknowledge something. I think we've scared a couple of people away from this because this is a big topic. So I want to make sure you understand it is a lot. I'm so sorry. You will be okay. Go to the next one. It will be okay. So we're going to jump right in. And again, I want you to realize that I realize this is a lot of information in a very short period of time. More than happy at any point in time, if you have questions while we're going through this, raise your hand, stop, put it in the chat. We'll make sure to get those questions answered. After we get through everything, if there are questions that you have, we'll have a Q&A time so you can ask those. At the end of that, if you still have questions that come to you in a day or two or even a month or two, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at any point in time. Because again, this is a lot of information and it's a lot to digest in a short period. Let's move on to the next part. So before we do anything else, let's just kind of go real quick about the law. So I'm not going to go into deep dive about the ADA. The ADA is a civil rights law that was signed into law 35 years ago on July 26th. So we just celebrated that anniversary. And in that law, when we think about the ADA, a lot of times people think about the standards, the 2010 standards for accessible design, or they are now thinking more about the WCAG standards. But in the law itself, which is a separate document from the standards of accessible design, that legal document, that law itself, there is some very specific language about how entities are required to do self-evaluations and transition plans if they are a Title II entity. So Title II entity is going to be any state or local government entity. So counties, cities, townships, uh, North Carolina State, we're all required under ADA to do certain things with a self-evaluation and transition plan. Okay? So one of the big questions that we have always is, are we even required to do a self-evaluation transition plan? There's people hear a lot of times, or because the information is so detailed and is so much, we hear a lot of times bits and pieces of it and go, I don't think that I'm required to do this. But the reality of it is, the ADA says that everyone, if you are a Title II entity, that you are required to do a self-evaluation. The self-evaluation we'll talk about in a little more detail here in a minute, but the self-evaluation is required by everyone. There are requirements for how long you have to keep that self-evaluation if you employ more than 50 people. So there are some specifics about that in the law, but if you're looking at best practices are that everybody should have a self-evaluation and should have a transition plan. And they're really kind of lumped together there. Go on to the next one. So when is a self-evaluation transition plan due? The self-evaluation transition plan were actually due in, I believe it was 1993, after the ADA was passed and signed. So we're actually already 35 years, 33 years past when this was due. Most entities, if you go back and if you start digging and asking people, you probably have one that was completed. But the chances are that has never been updated. Go on to the next one, please. So if it's already been completed, if the law does not say I have to do another one because I did a first one, why would I need to do one now? Why would I need to do one now? And the honest answer to that, there's really a couple of reasons. People, especially in park and recreation entities, are starting to look at their ADA transition plans, their self-evaluations, because of accreditation. There are places that want to go ahead and do their accreditation and become CAPRA certified. There are grants that are available that are requiring people to have their transition plans. And I apologize, I have a cold, so if you see me getting a cough drop like I'm going to now, I apologize for that. But there are grants that are available that are requiring you to have a self-evaluation and transition plan. There's also the threat of lawsuits and actual lawsuits that are being filed that are making people really look at whether or not they needed to get a transition plan done. And then there's a new generation of people who really have an expectation of inclusion, which is really a driving factor for a lot of entities on why they're looking at doing self-evaluation and transition plans. We have citizens who are saying, hey, everybody needs to be included. We want everybody to be included. And so in order to include everybody, we really need to know what our baseline is and where we're at as far as meeting accessibility requirements. And I'm going to be really honest with you. For me, I don't really care the reason that brought you here. I don't care if it's because you're looking at a grant or if it's because your citizens are saying, hey, this is important. I'm just glad that we're starting to get here. Whatever the reason that drove you here and made you want to look more into self-evaluations and transition plans, 100% fine with me. I'm just very glad that you're here, very glad that you're starting to look at it, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you some information that helps you navigate the process, because it is a big process. Let's go on to the next one. So in the ADA, there are administrative requirements for how we do certain things around the ADA. There are certain things that every Title II entity is required to do, and those are the administrative requirements. Go on to the next slide, please. Now, take a deep breath, because this is what you are required to do as a Title II government and a Title II government entity, whether you're state or local. These are the requirements, and we're going to go through some of these. Because a lot of times when we think about, again, transition plan, we think of it as a standalone process. I just come up with a list and I'm done. Start working on it and it's all good. But the reality of it is, when you're looking at what your requirements are to get to the transition plan, there are 5 other steps before you even get to step number 6, which is a transition plan. So without any more time, let's go ahead and jump into what those requirements are. Requirement 1, 2, and 3 of the administrative requirements are things that are most likely going to be tackled by your larger entity as opposed to your specific department. You should have at least one ADA coordinator that has been appointed by your county, city, township agency to act as the primary contact for any ADA concerns, complaints, whatever it may be. That is required by any organization that has 50 or more employees. So regardless of how many full-time staff you have, they're looking at a whole with that. So if you've got 20 part-time staff, 20 seasonal staff, and 10 full-time staff, you meet that threshold requirement that you have to have an ADA coordinator. For larger entities, a lot of times it makes sense to have more than one ADA coordinator. If you're in a county that has, you know, hundreds or thousands of employees, it makes more sense to have multiple ones. The ADA does not say that you can't have more than one. It says you must have at least one ADA coordinator. So that's number 1. Number 2, you have to have a public notice of your compliance with the ADA. It's just a really simple statement that says, yep, we are going to comply with the ADA. We understand the ADA. We welcome people in our community to anything that we do. And we have a process for you if you have a question, concern, or a grievance. And then developing a grievance process is actually the 3rd step in the ADA administrative requirements. And again, you have to have that if you have 50 or more employees. You have to have a grievance process. So if you go to the back to this part of it, so you see that's the first part. So we've already taken care of that. So when you're looking at this big, complex diagram, we've taken care of those first 3. Those are things that we're going to get done ahead of time. We'll go on to the next one. The next step that we need to do before we go into step number 4 is that we have to start gathering information. One of the things that you're actually doing today is part of this. It's part of that pre-step 4. You're gathering information. What do I need to have? How do I need to do this? What do I need to gather information on? You need to identify all your programs, services, activities, events, facilities, and their locations. When we're talking about parks, and we'll talk about this more when we look at the self-evaluation, when we're talking about parks, we are talking about not just the larger park system itself. You're also going to be talking about all the amenities that are within your park. If you have playgrounds, you're going to be talking about the accessibility of your playgrounds. If you have fields of play, you're going to be talking about fields of play. If you have ball caddies on your tennis court, you're going to be talking about the accessibility of the ball caddies. You're going to be needing to review that. So you've got all of the things, your programs, services, activities, events, and facilities, and their location that you need to get a list of. You also need to get a list of any of your internal standards. Different entities have different standards. Some groups like to vet plans with disability groups. It's an internal standard that they have. You might have an internal standard for the type of grill that you order because you know that grill it works best for y'all. It might work best for your community. It might be larger because you have a lot of people who come out and cook out in your parks or at your shelters. And so those types of things that you have an internal standard and already an internal process for, you want to get a list of those because you're going to be reviewing those. You want to conduct program interviews, so you want to talk to your programming staff. Whether that programming staff and by ADA, we're not necessarily talking about programming staff like your summer day camp staff or your athletic staff. We're talking also about, do you have facility maintenance? Do you have ground maintenance? Do you have planners? Everybody who works within our system is really conducting a program because they're offering something to the community. So you're going to conduct program interviews with all your staff, and we can talk generically about what that looks like in just a little bit. And then you want to gather all that data and all that information together so you can start moving towards the next step. So if you want to go to the next slide. So our next step that we're going to do kind of an overarching part. So we've got 4, 5, 6, 7, but we've also got a part up at the top that kind of spans across everything. And if you want to go to the next one, and that's going to be our public involvement. And it's going to take part during 4, 5, 6, and 7. It's just kind of looping. I think that park systems are probably better at getting community involvement and community engagement than the majority of any other type of disability focused group. If you're looking at the ADA, and you're talking about maybe within your system, finance, chances are they're not going to really want to get public involvement, get that community engagement. Parks and Rec, by nature of what we do, we have people who are easier for us to call on, and they're people who are more willing to be involved in things. It's challenging sometimes when you're talking about ADA and getting community involvement because you do need to focus on getting people involved who specifically have different disabilities or who are tied to the disability communities. So you want parents, you want caregivers, you want other other entities that provide services, and you want people with disabilities. Unlike a lot of groups, though, when you talk about people with disabilities, you're talking about a multifaceted group of people. You're talking about people who span all ages, all ethnicities, all all geographic areas of your community, all economic areas, across the span of who people identify as. And then within that, you've got people in a wide variety of different disability specific groups. You've got people who are maybe on the spectrum. So on the autism spectrum, you've got people who have different mobility challenges. You've got people in the IDD community, which is the intellectual developmental disabilities. So you've got people within that community. You've got people who are either experiencing or the caregivers, caretakers of people who are going through dementia. So you really need to get input from all these different groups. And again, I think that we're probably the best groups to do that because we already have those connections in the community. So it's going to be really, really important while you're working towards developing your transition plan is to start gathering people to help give you input, because you're going to want to rely on them on what's needed within the community and what will be working within the community. There is a saying within the disability community, it's nothing about us without us. And people are very willing to give information to you as long as you ask. So is, here a second. I just saw that pop up. I'm sorry. Is public involvement mandated during this self-evaluation portion? Is it okay if a town does a self-evaluation of its programs and services as baseline and then conducts community engagement as a check on our self-evaluation, and also to get feedback on the prioritization of improvements? It is mandated. It's part of the administrative requirements. So it is mandated that you do get public involvement. How you do that is a couple of different ways. Um, so if you have people that are already part of your process, most definitely get them in on the very beginning of it, and do, a community survey of what's needed and what people would like to see happen. People with disabilities are going to be your best resource to tell you what is not accessible with your community, with your facilities, with your programs. They're going to be your best resources to do that. But you can do that, and you want to do that across everything. You want to do it from the beginning if you can, and then do a check-in, and then also get that information when you're starting your planning process. People within the disability community are also, one of the challenges that people have a lot of times is when you go to try to get that financial support to make those changes. Some of the best resources that you're going to have if you go before a board, or if you go before whoever your highest administrator is going to be members of the community saying, I'm a taxpayer in this community. I have a disability, and this is why it's important to me. They're going to be some of your best resources in helping you really advocate for funding to make changes in your transition plan. And again, it's important to remember that if people, whether people are employed or not employed, members of your community, they pay sales taxes. If they go to the store, they're paying a sales tax. They are paying taxes into our system, and our taxpayers and are going to be the folks that are going to be there. So yes, it is mandated. You can do it a couple of different ways, and you definitely want to do it like what you've got. You really are wanting to look at doing it across all of the entirety of your process. All right. So on to our next one. So this is the big part of it. A lot of times we think that the big part of it is the transition plan, but it's really going to be the self-evaluation. So on your self-evaluation, it is a comprehensive review of all programs, services, activities, events, sites, and facilities. This is something that is required of all Title II entities, regardless of your size. So if you are in a community, and I'm trying to remember the list of people I saw who had registered. I think that there are several communities that are smaller. I personally live in a very small community where our full-time staff is very limited and very small. But regardless of that, we still are required to do a self-evaluation. It doesn't matter if you are in a township where you've got two, three, four people, you're required to do a self-evaluation. If you are in a community that has 1,000+ employees, you're required to do a self-evaluation. So when you're doing this comprehensive review of things, it's going to be all services, activities, events, sites, and facilities. The ADA, the law itself really looks at programs, services, and activities differently. And we as recreators, sometimes one of the hardest thing is to break our mindset of what a program, service, and activity is. Because if you ask the majority of people in recreation. Can you tell me what programs, services, and activities you have? We're going to start listing off classes that are offered. We're going to list off camps. We're going to list off athletic opportunities, services. We're going to list off maybe that we have shelters or fields or picnic areas. We may list off that we have a festivals that we are offer or that we partner with people on. But the way that the ADA looks at program services activities is everything we do that impacts the community. So when you're doing your self-evaluation, that means you're looking at and you're reviewing your policies and your procedures. You're looking at them on how they align with the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you have a policy or procedure that requires people to show an ID, is it that they have to show an ID or is it that they have to show a driver's license? If you're asking for them to show a driver's license, that's a policy that you need to change because a majority of people with disabilities don't necessarily have a driver's license. They most likely have some type of ID, but not necessarily a driver's license. Are you, and again, I'm going to I want to put a caution with this example because it is going to be something that you would want to talk with your legal about. However, there is a lot of precedent around this. Do you have a policy that says you do not give medication during summer day camp? You're going to really want to look at that policy and you're going to want to weigh it against what judgments and settlements have happened in the nation, across the nation, on how they're addressing that. Because for some children with disabilities, not being able to get their medication administered during a program is going to exclude them from that program. So it's something that you're going to want to look at. You're also, when you're looking at your self-evaluation, you're looking at all your facilities and sites. This is kind of a hard one because we're famous for wanting to partner with everybody, right? We're that group that we really want to partner with everybody. So we don't always have all the facilities to do everything we need to. So sometimes we use places of faith, places of worship to hold programs. Sometimes we go into the community and we use schools to hold programs. Sometimes we go into public places like a bowling alley or a skating rink. We have to, if we are offering programs in those places, those fall into the facilities and sites that we have to review when we're doing a self-evaluation. The same holds true when we're talking about people who are coming in, when we were talking about programs and services that we look at. If we have a group that we partner with, we have to ensure if we're partnering with them, if they're coming into our spaces to offer programs, we have to ensure that those meet the requirements of the ADA. So it's a really big endeavor. We have to look at our effective communication. Do you offer, if somebody said that they needed an ASL interpreter, do you or your staff know how to make that happen? Do you have a process for making that happen? If somebody needed Braille or if somebody needed large print, what is your process for making that happen? Along the same lines, with effective communication, when I mentioned the IDD population earlier, or even people who are on the spectrum, people with dementia, there are now federal guidelines for plain language. So when we talk about effective communication, we want to communicate with people. We want to meet them at their level. So whether it's meeting them at their level by ensuring that we've got ASL interpreters or meeting them at their level by ensuring that we're using plain language and we're using language, either our spoken or written language, that is understood by the majority of people. You also, when you're looking at your self-evaluation and when you're doing your review, it is going to be of all of your then this is where we get the more traditional, our programs, our services, our activities, and our events. Do you have a festival? Do you have Food Truck Friday? Because everybody loves Food Truck Friday. Um, do you have one? Do you have a time when people come in? It's the holiday season, and we're getting ready to start having our holiday parades. The town that I'm in, our holiday parade is the day after Thanksgiving. It is sponsored by the town that I live in. Is that parade accessible? Is it accessible to all members of the community? Are you having it on a route where people who use a mobility device that they can be and they can take part in it or not? If you have a food truck, how do you process that and how do you ensure that somebody can go to that food truck, order food just the same as everybody else and get the same service? So you have to evaluate that. One of the biggest challenges right now, and some things that are going into effect in the spring, have to do with web accessibility. You've got to review your web accessibility, and hopefully your entities are doing that on a larger scale because it is everything from your website to your social media to any third-party websites. If you use any type of registration management system or facility management system that's public facing, those things have to be accessible, and you have to be able to prove that they're accessible. So, if you use an app, if you've got something that is specific that somebody has developed for you, is it accessible for people to use? So any digital spaces have to be reviewed, and you have to review them against the requirements for the ADA for those digital spaces. You also need to look at your training. Training is part of that as well. How are we training people? What are we training people as far as the ADA? Are you talking to people about how you engage with people with different disabilities? Are you talking to people about how you make modifications in programs? What is your training looking like, and how does that match up with the requirements of the ADA? So all of those things go into your self-evaluation. And your self-evaluation, if you want to go to the next one, your self-evaluation is going to end up then flowing, it's going to eventually flow into your transition plan. But before it does, we're going to go to the next one. And you're going to have a list based on all that information that you gathered. If you want to go ahead to the next one, if we're going to have a list of all the information that you gathered, because you're required to have a program services and activities list that if anybody asks you, anybody from the community, anybody that's interested said, hey, I want to see your list of all your PSAs that are accessible. Do you have a list of that? Do you have a list of what the program is, what the service is, where the location that they're being held is, that is accessible? So any member of the community knows what is and what is not compliant and knows where those are being held at. So on to the next one. So we're finally getting to the actual part that we mentioned in the title of this, which is the transition plan. So let's move on to the transition plan. With the transition plan, it's really, really important for you to understand that everything you've done to this point is your build up to the transition plan. The transition plan is actually the easiest part of this. It's the absolute easiest part of this. Because back when we were talking about the self-evaluation, and I said you're going to review and you're actually going to do a comprehensive review of everything. The transition plan is not the part where you're going out with your audits to review your facilities. It's not the part where you're going out with your program audits to look at the programs and sports and camps that you offer. All of those things take part in the self-evaluation. So the transition plan is actually just the action plan to address what you discovered in the self-evaluation. So, the heavy lifting part of this is going to be during your self-evaluation, which is why you can't really have a transition plan without doing a self-evaluation. It's where you're going to get all the details. You're going to be going out measuring, and you're going to be going out counting, and you're going to be looking at that against the required standards from the 2010 Standards of Accessible Design. You're going to be looking at those facilities, those sites, those programs. You're going to be gathering all that data in your self-evaluation, and then you're going to use it to create your action plan, which is the transition plan. Now, federal law and one of our administrative requirements for the transition plan is that we have to have very specific things listed in there. So when you're doing this, the transition plan looks at physical access. It looks specifically at physical access because that is what specifically the standards for accessible design look at. So, what are those barriers that are going to impact people from being able to utilize your facilities? And in your transition plan, and you can do it a number of different ways. You don't have to do it in any certain order. I know you've probably seen where people say, oh, you have to have it just this way in just this spreadsheet. It's got to look just like that. It can look any way you want it to. If you've got an organization that's super proficient in developing dashboards, you can have it on a dashboard. If you are an entity that's like, look, we love Excel and we do everything in Excel, you can do it in Excel. You can do it as a Word document. You can do it any way you need to or want to, as long as you have an actual plan to it. It's an actual written plan. It can be written in any format that you need it to. And it has to have these following things. You have to have a list of your barriers. You have to have a method that you're going to remove those barriers. You have to have a schedule for removing those barriers. And you have to have who the responsible staff is. And this, again, is kind of one of those scary little things because we're naming names. The ADA asks you to name names. If you have a director who is over maybe over your parks department and over public works, they're going to be the one that's going to be named. If you've got a small entity, your ultimate person who is responsible for making sure this happens, it might be your town manager, city manager, or your county manager. They might be the person who is named in this document as being the responsible person. It could be a department director. It could be a division head, however your entity is set up. But when you do this, they literally are requiring you to name a name. So if I'm the head of a department and it's my entity, in my entity, I am the responsible person. In our transition plan, it would say responsible staff, Carla Gray. So it's asking you to name names. When it lists barriers, it's going to tell you that you have to list very specifically. The barrier is the door to the bathroom is too heavy. It exceeds 5 pounds of force to make that door move. So you're going to, that specific part of what the barrier is. Then it's going to require you to identify how you're going to change that barrier. What are you going to do to remove that? So that barrier removal is that we are going to work with the whoever it is, our maintenance person, to come in and they are going to take an Allen wrench and they are going to change that door closer and reduce the pressure. When is this going to be done? You look at your work schedule, their work schedule, and you're going to say, this is something that we can get done in the next 10 days. And you put it on the plan as that happening in 10 days. A lot of times people will ask, if we're going to do it that quickly, why do we want to put it on there? Because you want to note that you recognize there was a barrier and that you're moving forward on addressing all those, no matter how big or how small they are. So you're going to want to capture everything that you do and you're going to want to keep up with it so you can show that you're moving towards that. That was a really simple barrier that we talk about. What if the barrier is instead, and I'm not even going to tell you like a big one, but what if the barrier was that your parking lot, your accessible spaces are out of compliance because they do not meet the correct slope or cross slope, which we generically say is 2%. You can't have more than a 2% slope or a cross slope on an accessible parking space or in the access aisle. The actual is, I think it's 2.08, but everybody generically says 2%. So you've got a parking space that is 5%, and you know that it needs to be redone. So now you're talking about the physical barrier is that the accessible parking space has a slope and or cross slope greater than the allowable 2%. Methods for removal. We are going to have the parking surface resurfaced and ensure that our slope is less than 2%. The schedule of removal. This is where you start having some additional challenges because most communities don't necessarily have a bank of money to just go, oh, we've got this, we'll go ahead, we can get that scheduled. Nor do we have generally contractors that can do a turnaround for us. Things have to be scheduled. This might be something, again, depending on your particular situation, you might be able to say, hey, we can get this scheduled in 30 days. Or you might have to say, the way that we do our budgeting, we can get this on our next year's budget, in our existing budget. We can make plans for that. Or you might say, we need to put this on our capital improvement plan, and it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road before we can get that done. You have to have a plan. The plan has to be reasonable for scheduling. If you're talking about the door closer being adjusted, it would not be reasonable for you to say it's going to take us a year or 2 years to get that done. It would be reasonable, as long as you can justify, to say, hey, it's going to take us 2 to 3 years on our capital improvement, and this is why, to have this surface redone. Um, and then you're going to need to name your responsible staff. And you're going to do that for every single barrier that you have found when you're doing your self-evaluation. Once you get done with your transition plan and get everything set, you're going to want to constantly be looking at it and updating it. And so at the bottom of this, you kind of see, our original self-evaluations and transition plans were required to be completed by January 26th of 1993. My guess is that most of you have one of those. But a lot of entities never did one because there was so much confusion when the ADA first came out about how it needed to be done. There was very little information. Nobody had ever really had to do one before, and so there were some questions and some people that never got one done. There are entities that had them done, but now can't really prove it. There might be a reference to it in a board meeting where it was reviewed and passed. But if you're, like I said, some of the reasons why people are looking at it now, grants, funding sources, complaints, it could be all kinds of things. And accreditation, if you're being asked to prove that you had that transition plan originally done, most places will not accept a meetings from a board meeting saying, hey, it was done. They're going to want to see actually what that transition plan was. So that takes us into kind of why it's so important to updating those plans. So if you don't have an updated plan, it's going to be really significant for you to go ahead and start updating that plan. And then once you update it, a best practice says every 3 to 5 years, you should be reviewing and updating your entire plan. You should be updating that entire transition plan. And that's just a best practice for things. So if you're in a larger entity, You may have a 5-year plan of reviews. So you have X number of plans, X number of locations that you review, X number of greenways, parks, nature preserves, aquatics facilities, whatever it is that you have in your catalog of holdings for your parks and recreation department or for your parks and recreation district, you may want to go ahead and get a 5-year cycle. So you're constantly doing that review. And if you're doing that, it's not quite as overwhelming as when you first start doing it, when you're doing a whole bunch of it in a very short period of time. So let's go on to the next one. Um, if you look down at the bottom of this, and before we get over to number seven is really your action plan and your monitoring. So that's just kind of that ongoing. You know, how are we going to monitor this? How are we going to update our documents? How are we going to make sure that we have contractors available to us? So it's that overall action plan of how we get things done. But when we get down to the bottom of 6, when you see that 5-year cycle, you're going to start right back over. You're going to start right back over with identifying all your program services and activities, getting that list together. During that time, you're also going to be held accountable and responsible for maintaining accessible features. So the ADA says we understand that sometimes things have to get fixed and aren't going to be right at the beginning. But once you've got it fixed, you need to make sure that it stays fixed. You have a responsibility to maintain accessible features. In parks and recreation, we have this little challenge of things called trees. And trees do not like sidewalks. I don't know if y'all have ever noticed that or not, but trees don't like sidewalks. So you've got a path of travel that you put in and it's accessible. You not only was it accessible, you made it more than accessible. You made sure that it was below that maximum 5%. You did a great job of it. But somebody had either planted a tree or there was an existing tree that was close to that path. And as that tree grows, the roots grow. And as the roots grow, now all of a sudden your wonderful, pristine, accessible pathway starts to get heaves in it and it starts to lift. You're responsible for ensuring that that gets corrected as you go along. That might be shaving it down, it might be replacing. So you've got to have in your plan how you're also going to address those things that you've checked off. We've got this done, we've got this done, we've got this done. How are you going to continue to ensure that they stay actually accessible during that time? We've got two things. What is the requirement to update the plan? Is it as needed every 5 years? Up answered the question. Yeah, it's really it is that's the best practice. There's not a hard and fast in the ADA saying you have to do it but it has become a best practice within accessibility communities and within the ADA community that you look really at a 5-year maximum as your cycle because so much can happen during that 5-year time during that 5-year time frame that you need to make sure that you're staying on top of it, not only because of maintaining accessible features, but also we're constantly adding new stuff. Are you reviewing plans before things get built? When they get built, are you reviewing them post build? And are you reviewing them for accessibility? Because code and accessibility are two very different things. And if you've got your code inspector coming out, they're not looking at accessibility. They may be looking at very specific aspects of the North Carolina Chapter 11 accessibility, but that is not inclusive of all the requirements of the ADA. So how are you looking at those processes? What are you doing with that? Does a review every 5 or however many years mean reassessing facilities, programs, services, and activities? Do you remember up at the beginning of the when we started talking of the training when there were the slides that said "I'm sorry"? It is a lot, but it will be okay. The answer to that is, I am so sorry. It's a lot. It'll be okay. Yes, you do have to reassess those. There are things that change. I know that there are people that will tell you that we built the facility. A square wall is always going to be a square wall. It's the light fixtures are going to always be the same height. The light switch plates are going to be always at the same place. But we all know that's not true. If you have a change in vendors and they now have changed out all your toilet paper dispensers, and what used to be at an accessible reach distance is now you've got a different size roll and now it's at a different distance from the toilet. It's no longer accessible. You have a soap dispenser that's changed. It's no longer accessible. You've got it at a different place. You had a light fixture that went out and you decided this would be amazing if we had pendulum lights here. And you install pendulum lights and they look amazing, but they're too low, so they create a protrusion. You always are going to want to reassess everything inside and outside because so many things do change. All right, ready for the next? So, another factor in all of this when you're looking at your transition plan is how do you prioritize? How are you going to prioritize what you do? I personally like there's really two different things that I use to kind of meld together. And I like it because it really gives you some flexibility to think about what is the greatest need within your entity and also to think about how you can get these things accomplished, right? So priority one is going to be safety. Because this crosses over both ADA and risk management. And a lot of times it's the things that you can get funded quickest because it really is in the risk management world. So priority one, I look at as safety. Safety issues that create barriers that impact individuals with disabilities and the community as a whole. It can be as simple as your rugs in your entrance hall are not appropriately secured down, so they're tripping hazard, or it might be that you changed vendors and you've got a new vendor that's bringing you rugs, and the rugs no longer have a beveled edge but have a straight vertical edge that's over a half an inch high. They're no longer compliant, but the reason why they're not supposed to be over a half an inch high or quarter inch high, straight vertical, and a half an inch with a bevel for a total of a half an inch. If it's over that, it again creates a tripping hazard and it's not accessible. It impacts everybody. So that's going to be a priority one. A priority two is going to be an access issue where barriers that prevent an individual from fully participating in a program. That's going to be things like parking. If I can't get to the playground, I don't care that you've got the most beautiful playground that's all inclusive and you got all these grants and all this community support, but I can't even park. That's going to be something that's going to be a priority too. Or if I can park, but there's no path of travel to it, it's a priority too. I see it, but I can't use it. So it's going to be impacting whether or not I can participate in that. A priority three is going to be something that is a major inconvenience where I can use that facility or I can go to that program, but I can't use it as intended. One of the examples of that would be if you don't have appropriate grab bars. I can get into the bathroom, door's wide enough, the stall opens the right way, the latch is the correct thing on the stall. I can get in there. There's a wide enough space if I use a wheelchair for me to park my wheelchair next to the toilet, but there are no grab bars, so I can't transfer onto it. So I can use part of the space, but I cannot use as it's intended, which is as a restroom facility. So that's going to be something that's going to be a major impact. A fourth priority are things that are going to be minor impacts. That means that I can kind of use it, but it's not really accessible. That's going to be something that maybe half an inch, 2 inch, too tall, too low, might be a little bit heavy. So for some people with disabilities, they might be able to use it. With other people who have different disabilities, they might not be able to use it. And one of the things with the ADA when we look at is really that universal access. So that's one level of priority. So when you're starting to look at how you implement your transition plan, if you want to go to the next, there's another way, that another overlay that really I think works very well when you're looking at prioritization, especially when you're looking at a smaller entity. And by smaller entity, that could mean if you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 parks. I'm not necessarily saying it's somebody who has one or two. This can overlay in so many different ways, and it can also overlay when you've got really large park system. There's a number of different ways that you can use this, and one of the priorities is at use. So, what areas are going to impact the greatest number of people? Another one is risk. Which ones do you have the greatest level of potential issues, safety, and risk at? And then the third part is impact. What will create the most positive overall impact in the community? Is it going to be, if you're looking at how you're prioritizing something and you're looking at, we've got the same amount of funding, we can either do this parking lot that goes to a staff building and it's kind of compliant. There's some issues with it, but we need to restripe. Or I have an opportunity to do an accessible surface to a playground. Where is your impact for your community going to be greatest? Is it going to be developing that? Is it going to be developing that playground, or is it going to be restriping a parking lot? For some of you, it might be restriping the parking lot. So it really kind of depends. So we'll go on to the next one. And I see the ones in the chat, and I'll get to those in just a second. I know we're kind of getting closer on time, so let's get through this real quick. So deadlines. When you're looking at doing your transition plan, I want you to do something that's really important, and I want you to give yourself grace. Whether you're doing it, whether you're contracting out to somebody, whether you're just hoping it gets done magically one night, the ADA troll, gnome, whoever gives it to you. You give yourself grace. These take a lot of time. If you are doing this specifically to apply for a grant, you're not going to have a strong or successful transition plan. You're not going to be able to do your self-evaluation the way that you need to. You might be doing bits and pieces of it. Terry mentioned at the beginning that I I am the owner of Accessibility Essentials, but I also work for a fairly large entity, a parks department within the state, and completing that specific transition plan, that self-evaluation and transition plan, was a 5-year process. It was a 5-year project. And so give yourself grace. It's not something that you're going to end up necessarily completing in that month and a half that you have between now and when you're going to need to apply for a grant, or if you want to apply for accreditation. Recognize that while there's some parts you can do, you're not probably going to be able to complete your entire development of it because it's so extensive. You want to go ahead to the next one? Yeah, so it sometimes you're just slogging through the mud. And it really does, you have to recognize that you will eventually get to that finish line of getting it completed, but give yourself grace on how you get there. We're going to go to the next one. You also need to know your limits. You need to know what your limits are and what the limits of your forms are, what the limits of the people who are helping you are. And by that, I mean, ChatGPT is not going to give you correct answers. So if you are hoping to If you're hoping to do the majority of your development of your self-evaluation and transition plan through Google searches or through ChatGPT, you are going to not have a fully formed and not with the intent of what you need to have. So know the limits of the information that you're gathering. Even if you get forms, there are a lot of different forms and a lot of different check boxes and check lists that you can use to create to do your self-evaluation. A lot of them are really good. Some of them are more generic. A lot of them aren't necessarily focused on parks systems. So know those limitations. It doesn't mean don't use them. It just means know the limitations of them. There are people that you can work with, different entities and organizations who will tell you, and I think this is one of the biggest disservices that people do to their community is when people tell you, oh, you don't have to evaluate everything. You can just evaluate 10%. We just need a sampling. You are doing the biggest disservice to your community if you follow that path. So again, know what your limitations are. Know what your limitations are as far as your level of knowledge, the sources you're using, the forms you're using, the platforms you're using, and the people you may be using. So just be aware of that. Because that's going to really help guide you on things. If you know something is going to be only focused on certain things and you're good with that and your entity is good with that, by all means, do what you need to for you and for your entity. But be aware of it and be ready to defend that if somebody asks you about it, if a member of the community asks you. So, some compliance questions, and then we had to, real quick, are there NC-specific resources, experts, networks, or call lines for ADA coordinators? I have some contacts at NCDOT that I use, but I've had trouble getting responses from the U.S. Access Board. Oh, that's surprising. When I need help interpreting or implying standards. And then Christina had put, I heard someone from NC Department of Insurance can be helpful, but I have not reached out to her. That used to be Laurel Wright. She has since retired. There is a new person who is there now, who is Tara. And so yes, they know NC code, but again, remember the state code can be greater than the ADA, but it cannot be less than. There are some very specific things that they have higher requirements and standards on than are for the ADA, but it is not across the board. So the Chapter 11 with the code is not going to be all encompassing for you. But if you have some very specific things, especially if you're looking at greenway slopes, they're a great resource for that. If you are looking for I'm really surprised about the Access Board. I have a great relationship with the folks at the Access Board, and I would really encourage you to call them again, or if you want, I can send you some names of the folks that I know of at the Access Board who are really good about answering questions. There's two different areas of the Access Board, and depending on when you've contacted them, especially now with some of the funding cuts and the shutdown, I definitely see that would be an issue with it. But there are two different kind of areas. One of the groups with the Access Board, the U.S. Access Board, which is an arm of the ADA, which is an arm of the Department of Justice. One of the arms with the Access Board does the interpretive part of the law. The other part of it does the interpretive part with the standards. So I'm not sure which you were necessarily looking at, but if you want, I can give you some names of some folks who are there who've been helpful with that. And then again, like I said, if you do want to reach out to the Department of Insurance with North Carolina, they're good about giving you information about North Carolina code. And specifically, if you want to look at greenway standards, they're great about that. Health Department, North Carolina Health Department is great if you're looking at service animal questions in relation to your aquatics facilities and service animals. So there's different folks. There are several different statewide. If you go on to, and I'll make sure that Charlene has this to send out. There are a couple of sites where you can look and see who are nationally certified in the state. If you wanted to do that, so you can look at who is a certified ADA coordinator, you can do that, and that's a set of training that's in addition a set of training and some standardized tests that you have to do to become certified in that. I think that it on yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it gets interesting how things all meld together. Just as an example, real quick, when we're talking about code and ADA standards, the ADA standards for signs for accessible parking are not as high as the standards for North Carolina signs for accessible parking. So where federally you don't have to put up the fine and you don't have to put up the general statute, in North Carolina, we require, so if you look at an accessible parking sign and it doesn't tell you what the maximum fine is, or if the bottom it doesn't say GS and give you the code number, that sign is actually not accessible in North Carolina, although it would meet federal accessibility requirements. So it gets really interesting how they all meld together. So some common compliance issues that you're going to face, guaranteed you are going to see these. You're going to have issues with parking because for some reason people like to park in parking lots. And as they start parking in parking lots, those parking lots break down. Whether it's the lines that break down, you have sagging areas, your asphalt or your concrete breaks down, whatever it is, they're going to be one of your biggest issues when you look at compliance. And in your transition plan, once you do your self-evaluation, you're probably, that is either going to be your number one or your number two most frequent issue that you're going to come across. Okay, go to the next, please. The next one is going to be bathrooms. The reason why you're going to have so many issues and compliance issues in their bathrooms is there are so many things in bathrooms that have to be compliant. This was a bathroom. Actually, I took this last weekend. It's a bathroom that I had been to the week before, and it was compliant. And I went last Saturday, and it wasn't compliant. The reason why it wasn't compliant is you see where the sleeve, the protective sleeve, which is required, you have to have protection against exposed pipes. Last weekend before last, it was covered and it was fine. Last weekend, it was starting to fall off, so it's no longer compliant. And that's when we talk about, again, maintenance of accessible features, how quickly things can change. This bathroom went in a 7-day period from one Saturday to the next Saturday from being compliant to being non-compliant with the ADA. Let's go ahead to the next one. Stairs and path of travels. A lot of people have a misconception that stairs are not allowed by the ADA. Stairs are allowed by the ADA. There's a lot of people with various disabilities who are going to benefit from stairs versus a very long switchback ramp. If you have somebody who has certain musculoskeletal, like if you had somebody who had MS, neurological, somebody who has COPD, where they've got pulmonary issues, respiratory issues, it may be beneficial for them to be able to go down a set of stairs as opposed to have to walk a long ramp. So they are approved in the ADA, but there are standards for them. There are standards for how high things the runners can be, standards for how wide the railing can be, how it has to extend. And I think because a lot of people are moving away from stairs, which I get, and I don't necessarily disagree with. The stairs that we do have in our systems, a lot of times have never been updated. So that's one of the things that you're also going to find. If you've got stairs, you're most likely going to have a lot of compliance issues with them. And the next one. I love little libraries. I love little pantries. I love little doggy treat areas. But you're going to have issues with these because a lot of times these are our community engagement and community builds, right? So there are people who want to do things for our community, in our community, and they go, I can put one of these in the park. It's an Eagle Scout project or it's a Girl Scout advanced project. And so it's like, great, these are wonderful. But we have to have standards that we make sure that folks are given before they do them that are compliant with the ADA. If they're too far off of a path, if they don't meet reach range, if they're too high, if the door is too hard to open, they are not compliant. And it doesn't matter if we say, hey, it was an Eagle Scout project, it was not us. That does not matter. It's on our property. We are required to keep it compliant. We are required to make sure it was compliant in the first place. And if it's not, it needs to go on to our transition plan. One of the best ways to solve things like that is to have a set of preferred practices. So when somebody does come to you and says, hey, I want to do this, whether it's a service project for an organization or a faith group, or whether it is Boy Scout, Girl Scout, any of the other ranger programs, that you have something already in writing saying, hey, that's great. Here are the standards that are related to the Americans with Disabilities Act because we want everybody to be able to use it. We need you to make sure and follow these as well. So that's a good way to kind of address that, but you are going to come across that. Next, benches. I love benches in parks. But if you look at this, um, it is not compliant because there is no companion seating. Uh, it's built on a pad. An easy way to do that is extend the pad on either side and you've got companion seating. Companion seating is not seating that is in the path of travel. So a lot of times people go, well, they can just sit on the pathway. That is not accessible seating. That is not a companion seating. It does have to be something that is going to be on one side or the other, or it has to be extended far enough back where you're off the path of travel. We, again, in Parks and Rec, because we love our outdoors, which is why we're in Parks and Rec, we love it, and we love to put down benches in the middle of a field because it's just beautiful. And it is just beautiful, but we have to have a path of travel to it, and we also have to have companion seating. Before anybody asks, does every single one of them have to be? No, it doesn't. Should every one of them be? Yes, it should. A good rule of thumb is 20% of your path of your benches need to be accessible on an accessible path of travel and have companion seating. The I don't want to say correct, but if you're truly trying to build a welcoming and inclusive community, you're going to want all of them to be on an accessible path of travel and have companion seating. If you can't do that right now, start with 20%. If you've got 10 of them on a loop path, make sure 2 of them are on the accessible path and have the companion seating. We'll go ahead to the next. The the other compliance issue that you're most likely going to come up against is ramps. This is a great ramp. It gets you into the playground. It's wonderful. But it's not compliant because that entrance lip is too high. Those are the types of things that you're going to want to look at. It's really hard because that is getting used over and over again. So that path going up to the ramp is getting worn down. Chances are when it was first installed, it was probably level, it was great, it was perfect. But as we use things, they get worn, it gets worn down. That's what impacts our compliance, and that's what you need to look at when you're doing your self-evaluation. These are the types of things you're going to look at. You're not just looking at those huge, big issues. You're looking at all the little things that keep people from being able to fully access all the great things that you are offering them. And the next slide. So now what? What do you need to do? You need to take a deep breath, tell yourself it's going to be okay, and then you need to start working on it. You need to take steps towards doing your self-evaluation and your transition plan. You need to give yourself grace. You need to understand that it's not something that you're going to start on Monday morning next week. You're not going to go in to the office on Monday morning and say, we're going to have a self-evaluation transition plan, and I'm going to have it done by the end of the year. That's not going to happen unless you have one park. And if you do, I want to come see you. If you have one place, yeah, you can do that. But if you really are looking at your processes, if you're looking at how you do your self-evaluation and transition plan, because those are tied together, you need to look at your programs. You need to look at your services. You need to look at, are you doing flyers? Are you giving people flyers? Are those compliant? Are you using the correct contrast of your colored paper and your printed text? Are there multiple texts that just make it hard to read for somebody who has different visual acuity? You need to look at everything, come up with your plan, and then start working towards it. While it can seem overwhelming, you're never going to get it done if you don't start. It really is going to be okay. You just have to take it one step at a time, take it a little bit at a time, and start moving forward on it. And then the next slide. Are there any additional questions? I know we had some through it, and I appreciate all those questions. They're great questions because there are so many different components to this, not only to the ADA as a whole, but there's so many components to developing a self-evaluation transition plan. There are so many people that are relying on you to create access and inclusion. And this is one of the best ways, or the best way to do it. Getting people involved with your creation of your transition plan, making sure once that they, and I didn't mention this, but once they're done, once your transition plan is done, make sure and let people know that it's done. Tell them what you're doing. Let them celebrate with you all the amazing things you're doing. You know, you're going to come across not only things that are not compliant when you're really looking at things, you're going to come across some things that you're going, wow, we do really good at that. And you want to make sure that you let people know that because of our self-evaluation and transition plan, we found out we're doing all these great. We found out that we've got this accessible pathway that loops around our the most beautiful lake that we have, the most beautiful pond, the most beautiful overlook, whatever it may be. We found out all these amazing things. Celebrate that. Let your community celebrate that with you. Let them help guide you and let them celebrate with you. Do your transition plan, do your self-evaluation, and then let people know. It's the best way to do it.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
All right, Carla. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you for blowing our minds. And
Sorry.
I've been working with you for I don't know how many years, 20 some, and you teach me something every time we talk, and I appreciate that. What's next for RRS? We have done 2 of these on-demand webinars. You can go out and watch both of them on the Rec Resources side. I believe Charlene dropped the link in there for you to do that. And next, we're going to hit the road. We realize these self-evaluations can be a little daunting. So our plan is to do 6 different 2-day trainings in the next year and a half all over the state. The first day we'll concentrate on the basics, the restrooms, the parking lots, the passive travel, those type of things. And then the second day, you'll get into more of the shelters, picnic areas, playgrounds, fields of play. This will be hands-on, learning how to use the different tools to do your self-evaluation. Right now, we're looking for some volunteers. If you have a park that you'd like to offer up for us to come out and do a self-evaluation to do this workshop at, we're looking for something that has all of those components. Not necessarily a park that was built in the 70s, but but not one that was built in 2010 either. You know, somewhere in the middle there that has some good things and some bad things about it. But if you would like to volunteer your park, your facility to do that, just reach out to your RRS rep. Like I say, we're looking to do 6 different trainings throughout the whole state. We'll do 2 in the spring, 2 in the fall, and then 2 in the spring of 2027. Again, these on-demand webinars are available online. Please refer your colleagues and your peers throughout the state to go out and watch these and be on the lookout. We will probably announce early next year, probably January, February, where the first 2 workshops are going to be. Does anybody have any further questions? Again, thank you, Carla. Appreciate everything that you do. And I appreciate the fact that you are so accessible to everyone. So you're accessible. So ADA coordinator, you're accessible to everyone and always available for that quick call and to steer you in the right direction. Carla is the Encyclopedia Brown of ADA. That's an obscure reference half of you won't get. But anyway, Carla is a walking reference from having so many years in the field as well as so much hands-on experience in the field of park and recreation. We appreciate you.